So a couple of years ago, I was asked if I wanted to go heli skiing in Alaska. Obviously, it's not the sort of thing you say no to, even if, as certain people here know, I'm a shit skier. I mean, I can't do a black run, shit myself on a difficult blue, but obviously I thought that jumping out of a helicopter on some uncharted territory was a good idea. I figured I'm a journalist, they're not going to let me die on a mountain. It would be quite bad PR. So in March 2015, I found myself in Alyeska, which is a mountain resort about an hour outside Anchorage. And on the drive out to the mountain, the PR for the resort gave me a little side eye from the driver's seat. And she said, oh, there's another group staying at the hotel this week. 18 Navy SEALs finishing their extreme winter training. So, obviously we had a little look around for them. Not that hard to spot. For a start, they can't really hold their arms down by their sides awfully well. But also 18 grown men in a hotel bar, all drinking the same drink. I think that's the definition of being institutionalized. But the first night, the drink was Kahlua and milk. Macho. So my friend Rachel and I were doing some hair tossing at the bar. I actually had hair to toss then. Obviously sizing them up, picking them out. The boys in our group were being disparaging. And as we were leaving the hotel bar to go to dinner, a couple of the little milk drinkers put their milk down and summoned me over to say hello and wanted to know where I was from and what I was doing, and they heard the accent and were very interested. And when I asked them the same questions, they said they were just a bunch of guys doing some skiing together with big arms. Chris was a very cute one from California. Was definitely about a decade or so younger than me, but very sweet. And over the next few days, I'd bump into him in the coffee bar or in the bar, and he would chat. And I bumped into him one afternoon in the coffee bar when I just finished my avalanche training and my crevice rescue drill. And I'd been issued with a probe for finding bodies in the snow. So obviously, I thought he would be a good person to know at this point. And he very kindly offered to lead the search party if I got eaten by a wolverine. And that was, to be honest, all that I was focusing on when I did jump out of a helicopter at the top of a mountain was being rescued by Chris. Since I'm here tonight, you'll obviously know that I didn't die at the top of a mountain, but it definitely wasn't my finest hour. And if you asked me again, I'd say, fuck no. I didn't actually see Chris for a couple of days after I'd survived the heli skiing, and I was a bit worried that he might have been lunch for a wolverine doing their midnight camping out in the wild. And so on our last night, I was leaving the hotel bar just as he was arriving. And he tried to persuade me, to come to a local bar, the Sitzmark, obviously got called the Shitsmark later on. I said we had other plans, it was our last night, until I'd had about a vat of wine and about 4 hours later, and I dragged everyone to the Sitzmark. Navy SEALs, I don't know what's going on behind me. Navy SEALs definitely don't beat around the bush. A couple of drinks, some unseemly public displays of affection, and we were back in my hotel room. Do you know what I really do? He asked me in the cab on the way back. And I told him that I did. Later on, when we were in bed, he said I could ask him anything, except anywhere he'd been and anything he'd done. It was really hot. And I knew that he could snap my neck with his little finger if he wanted to. And possibly put up some shelves with his eyes. It's amazing. Oh, and I forgot to mention, when we got back to the hotel and got out of the taxi, the northern lights were over the mountain. Alaska is ridiculous. But before Alaska, seriously, the only thing I knew about the Navy SEALs were from American Sniper, which was another suggestion that I gave to Sam. And the reports I'd read after Osama bin Laden got taken out by SEAL Team 6. And my favorite part of all of the coverage about that mission was the detail that Navy SEALs, in order to qualify, have to be able to undo fiendishly difficult knots underwater. But I can now confirm that they are very dexterous and can hold their breath for very long periods of time. Unfortunately, I had to vacate my room at 6 a.m. the next day because we were going kayaking on a lake where two tectonic plates meet just beside a glacier, obviously. So I packed up in 5 minutes, gave him a salute, ran off to the car park to meet my friends, smug as fuck. I hadn't even tried to sleep, so my kayaking was about as good as my heli skiing that day. Halfway across the lake, a little baby grey seal bob passed, which was, lovely foreshadowing, or post-shadowing, probably. And my friend Rachel, paddling hard at the front, me doing very little at the back, she was asking if I was going to see him again. And I was like, he lives in Virginia. He's a Navy SEAL. I mean, it's just a one-night thing. It's best left as a one-night thing. I ran off before we could even have that really fun chat about numbers. I was like, let's just leave it there. Then I got back to Brooklyn and thought, maybe not. I knew his last name, which I was quite surprised by myself, and did a little bit of Googling, but I couldn't find anything about him online. I don't know if that's a national security thing or he just isn't very up on social media. Don't know. So I did what any self-respecting journalist would do. I called up the marketing girl at the hotel, explained the situation, asked her if she could get his number for me. She called up the commander of the unit, told him she needed Chris's details for hotel business, called me back 5 minutes later with his cell phone number. The efficiency of the sisterhood. Now, I wish I could tell you the initial text that I sent to him, but I threw my phone off a speedboat a few months later, so I've got nothing archived before August 2015. But it was a very polite text, thanking him for a lovely time and hoping that he survived the Wolverines. Nothing. Silence. No reply. Until about 2 months later, when I was sitting in my pajamas on a friend's sofa with her new baby on my lap, and a message arrived, "Hey, sexy." Now, from anyone else, as my friends know, this would not be acceptable. Hey, sexy, hey at all, is not an acceptable opening. But I figured he gets a free pass in honor of his service to the nation. He was back in Virginia Beach. I was in DC at the time. So I said maybe he'd like to pop up for another go-round. He proceeded to tell me exactly what he'd like to do this time around, and I agreed it sounded lovely. So then another couple of months went by, and I hadn't heard from him again until August. He wanted me to send him a picture. So I did. I sent him a really nice picture of me sitting on a wall at sunset in the south of France. It wasn't really the sort of picture he wanted. And I realized this is a really controversial statement to make, to confess to at a sexting festival, but I don't send naked pictures of myself to anyone, not even Navy SEALs. I realize I'm not Jennifer Lawrence and the security risk is probably very low, but the idea of sending something out into the ether that I then have no control over just feels very risky. Words, yes. Pictures, no. And the idea of sending it to a base full of dudes just seems really silly. But by the same token, I don't really want to receive dick pics, in spite of many generous offers, including those from the military. It's just not my thing. When he texted me about a month later, it happened to be my birthday. My 38th birthday. I know, you can't believe it. He's 27. He was also in Germany at the time. But obviously I wasn't allowed to ask what he was doing, where he was going. But he said he'd be there until the new year. So we talked about the possibility of maybe trying to meet when I was home in Europe for Christmas, and exactly what we'd do and where we'd go and how we'd spend our time, obviously. So our sexting continued with some regularity for the next couple of months. And I was, by this time, in a very complicated real-life relationship with a non-military person. That's a whole other story. But his little missives were actually a bit of light relief from something that was becoming pretty heavy and not very fun. So I sent him some pictures from Halloween, some of my trip to Nashville, and a really fun breakup holiday in Indonesia. And then he went silent again. Absolutely nothing. Nothing at Christmas, nothing at New Year. And actually, I started to get a bit worried about him. And then in early February, I was in British Columbia, skiing again with the same group I'd been in Alaska with. And I couldn't believe they actually would ski with me again after that debacle, but they did. And the boys wanted to know, how's Delta Force? And I had to admit, I was genuinely really anxious about him. I'd gone about 3 weeks, maybe a month before, without hearing from him. But I'd never gone almost 3 months. And then when I send the messages during those times, they don't get that little thing that says delivered. Weirdly, one morning when we were in Canada, I got a text at 5 a.m. from a foreign number I didn't recognize. Hey, what's new? I don't know why I'm doing that voice, sorry. Doesn't even talk like that. Hey, what's new? Your number, I wrote back. It's not in my phone. Who is this? Remember Alaska? He wrote back. He's not got the best lines, okay? He's a Navy SEAL. Remember Alaska? He wrote back. Winky face. I obviously had a lot of questions, such as, why are you messaging me from a Greek phone? Oh, I was just in Greece, he said. Didn't elaborate any further. And then we're off again, back and forth, filthy sexting for days. I honestly would read some of you out with them verbatim, but this is being recorded and I might want to go into politics one day, so I'm not going to. I think some of them might be on the wall, though. In the fallout from this very complicated relationship and the really fun breakup holiday in Indonesia, I went to see a love coach for a story I was writing. This is one of the other really great things about my job. I can get free therapy, in fact, free anything, to be honest with you, and call it work. It's great. She diagnosed in our first session that I had a fondness for alphas. No shit. She also observed that my Navy SEAL was in some ways totally perfect for me. Super alpha, highly sexed, doesn't demand any of my time, of which I have none. She also pointed out that his elusiveness only made him more enticing to me. You might already know the science of this, but when you get a text or a message or a picture from someone you like, you get a dopamine rush. Dopamine is the chemical associated with gambling and drugs as well as sex. It's basically the best chemical. But it isn't just about pleasure. It's about anticipated rewards. So it signals feedback for predicted rewards. And the longer your brain is made to wait for the reward, the greater the dopamine rush when the reward is finally received. So basically, if you message someone and he messages straight back, you feel pleased, you're happy. But if you don't hear from him for a few hours, and then he texts, it's like, fuck, he texted. The dopamine rush is enormous. So if you take that, times it by about 12 weeks, and the person you're waiting to hear from is fighting ISIS, when he finally texts, it's a pretty fucking massive dopamine rush. And when you do finally hear from him, you can't get pissed off that he hasn't texted earlier because he's fighting ISIS. And he does always turn up eventually, full of very colourful sexts. And then when I mention my concerns about fighting ISIS, he'll tell me not to worry about it, and he'll quickly change the subject. Late last year, we took our relationship to the next level. We started having phone sex. He was in Florida, or so he said, fuck knows. I was in Brooklyn. And then he disappeared again. I sent a few festive sexts, not delivered. He didn't pop up again until mid-January, weirdly on the morning of the Women's March when I was in DC. What Women's March? He asked. Now, I honestly don't know if he'd been in a foxhole in Syria or the Women's March doesn't get a lot of play in the military. I don't know, but he seemed genuinely baffled. So we had another 24-hour flurry, and then he disappeared again, which was really odd, actually, not the usual pattern. And then about 10 days later, the news broke that a Navy SEAL from the same base as him, Virginia Beach, had been killed in a raid in the Yemen. I obviously Googled everything I could on the story. The SEAL who had been killed wasn't Chris, thank God, but I had no way of contacting him to make sure he was okay. In fact, I didn't hear from him until mid-March, a few weeks ago, when I was at South by Southwest in Austin with a lot of people here. A text from him landed when I was at lunch with some of my friends here. And the relief and the dopamine rush was seriously so enormous I thought my head might fall off. He wanted to have a chat, so I went back to the apartment I was staying in and called him. And I finally asked him what the reason was for these long silences. And he said, I'm sometimes in places where I don't have my phone for a long period of time, or I'm sometimes in places where I don't have any coverage. But when I pressed him on why, he wouldn't answer, and he changed the subject. Fair enough, I got the message, shut the fuck up, Jane. It's a slightly bizarre situation, I'll be the first to admit. I mean, I haven't seen him for 2 years. Our relationship is purely sexual. And I would genuinely be keen for another physical meeting in real life. But truthfully, it's not really a relationship I see working outside the confines of our phone anymore. I don't really think I'm cut out to be a military spouse. Plus, on the night we met, he told me he could never vote for Hillary. That's my pillow talk, by the way. I also talk about healthcare and tax and the welfare state. It's weird that I'm single. Plus, I haven't asked him who he did vote for because I don't think I could get it up for a Trump voter, and I'd honestly really rather not know. And honestly, I figure that voting aside, if I was fighting ISIS, when I got home, I would want some lovely sexts and maybe some phone sex to take my mind off wherever the fuck I'd been and whatever I'd done. So I don't really have any expectations of him, and I don't want anything from him, or even anything more from the relationship. To me, sexting with him, call me a romantic, is the modern day equivalent of writing letters to a soldier in the front in northern France. Although I would hope that mine are probably a little bit more explicit. But that's because I don't think they are actually monitored and censored by the Department of Defense. But actually, just in case they are, I'm still not sending him a picture of my muff.